The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. I remember because I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with the radio on. Some program, Eloise used to say, so I had a thing I only listened to, so I had something to complain about. She was right, of course. She was right about most things. "Mr. Whitmore," the voice said, "this is Josephine Laird, from Laird and Associates. We handled your wife's estate." I set down my mug. "I remember you, Miss Laird. I wonder if you could come in this week. There's something I've been holding for you, per your wife's instructions. Per your wife's instructions." I turned that phrase over in my mind for a long time after I hung up. Eloise had been gone for 3 years. She'd organized everything before she passed. The will, the accounts, the transfer of the cottage up near Parry Sound. She'd been meticulous, always had been. So what could possibly be left? I drove into the city on Thursday. It was November and the 401 was already doing what the 401 does in November, grinding everything down to a gray, slow crawl. I had plenty of time to think. My 2 sons, the older one, Remy, and the younger one, Sean, had both been with me when we first met with Miss Laird after Eloise's funeral. I remember how they'd sat across from me in those stiff chairs, both in jackets they'd dug out for the occasion, asking careful questions about timelines and accounts. At the time I thought it was just how they processed grief, by wanting to understand what came next. Eloise had always said I gave people too much benefit of the doubt. I was starting to wonder if she'd been right about that, too. Miss Laird's office was on the 22nd floor of a building on Bay Street, the kind of place with a receptionist who offers you water in a glass, not a bottle. She met me at the door herself, shook my hand, and led me to a chair in front of her desk. There was an envelope sitting in the center of the desk, plain white. My name on the front in Eloise's handwriting. I hadn't seen her handwriting in 3 years. "She left this with us approximately 8 months before she passed," Ms. Laird said, "with specific instructions that it be delivered to you personally and only to you, no sooner than 36 months after her death." I looked up. Why 36 months? "She didn't explain her reasoning to me," Ms. Laird said gently. "She did say that by then you'd understand why." She stepped out and closed the door behind her. I sat there for a moment just looking at the envelope. That handwriting. The way she wrote the capital W, 2 overlapping loops, like she'd been taught by a nun somewhere and never quite shook it. I used to tease her about it. I opened it. There were 3 pages, handwritten on the cream stationery she kept in the roll-top desk in her study. I could picture her sitting there, writing this. Probably early in the morning, when she still felt well enough to sit upright for more than an hour. "Thaddeus, if you're reading this, then enough time has passed for what I'm about to tell you to matter. I didn't want to burden you while you were grieving. I know you. You would have tried to fix everything immediately, and you would have made a mess of it. So I waited, and I'm asking you to trust that I knew what I was doing. I need to tell you what I saw, and then I need you to listen, really listen, to what I'm asking you to do." I had to put the letter down. My hands were unsteady. Not from age, or not only from age. There was something in the way she was already talking to me, like she knew I'd resist. Like she was still in the room. I picked it up again. 3 months before my diagnosis, I found a statement on the printer in the study. I thought it was mine. I was printing things constantly at that point, trying to keep the household accounts straight. But it was Remy's credit card statement. I don't think he knew I'd seen it. There was a balance of $84,000. I didn't say anything to you because I didn't know what it meant yet. But I started paying attention. What I found over the following weeks wasn't one problem. It was a pattern. Remy had been carrying that debt for almost 2 years. He had a second line of credit through his business, also maxed. He'd borrowed against his car. And he was paying none of it down, not even the minimums on some accounts, because he'd been telling Brenda that the money would come. That it was coming. I heard him on the phone with her once in the backyard. I wasn't eavesdropping. I just wasn't supposed to be outside. "It'll all be sorted when Dad's situation changes," he said. I stood at the back window for a long time after. "Your situation, Thaddeus. That's what your son called it, your situation." I had to stop again. I'd stood up without realizing it. I was at the window now, looking down at Bay Street, at the tiny cars and the tiny people. and I was thinking about the Christmas dinner 3 months ago. How Remy had asked me, so casually, whether I'd thought about downsizing the house. How Sean had nodded along very seriously, saying something about freeing up capital and not wanting me to be lonely rattling around in that big place. I'd told them I was fine, that I wasn't ready. I'd thought they were worried about me. I went back to the chair. I kept reading. I can't tell you with certainty what Sean knows or doesn't know. He's always been harder to read than his brother. But I know that the two of them have spoken about your finances more than once. I overheard parts of a conversation when they thought I was asleep in the next room at the hospital. They were talking about the house, the investment accounts, the cottage. They weren't talking about how to help you manage those things. They were talking about what they'd do with them. I sat in that hospital bed and I thought about whether to tell you then. I nearly did, twice. But you were already so frightened, Thaddeus. And I knew that if I told you, you'd confront them, and then everything would become about that. And I didn't want my last months with you swallowed up by conflict with our children. I wanted what time we had left. I'm sorry if that was selfish. What I'm asking you now is not to confront them, either. Not yet. Not until you've spoken with a lawyer who is not a friend of the family and not connected to either of the boys. Not until you've had the accounts reviewed by a financial advisor who has no history with us. And not until you've sat with all of it long enough to think clearly. You have always been the most generous man I've ever known. That generosity has been a gift to everyone around you, including to me. But I'm asking you now to protect yourself. Not for my sake. I'm past needing protection. For yours. For the years you still have ahead of you. You deserve those years. Don't let them take them from you. All my love, always. Aloise folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I sat in that chair for 20 minutes. Then I went out to the reception area and I asked for a glass of water. I drove home in a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, exactly. More like the quiet after a very loud noise. That ringing silence where your ears are still adjusting. I went through the motions. Highway, exit, residential streets, my own driveway. I sat in the car for a few minutes after I turned off the engine, just looking at the house. It's a house in Oakville. We bought it in 1991 when the boys were 7 and 5. We'd driven by it 3 times before we made the offer. Eloise kept saying she needed to see it in different kinds of light. The front porch has a railing I painted myself, twice. The garden along the south side was her project. I mow around it every summer very carefully. My sons had been living in that house for the past 11 months. That was how Remy had framed it when he'd asked, 14 months ago. Just until we get the reno finished on the townhouse, Dad. It won't take long. We don't want to be paying rent somewhere so when we could be useful to you. Brenda, his wife, had smiled at me in that particular way she had, like she was already being very patient about something. They'd moved in with the 2 kids. My grandchildren, Oliver and May, who are lovely and entirely responsible for anything that follows. Sean had arrived 6 weeks later with a different story. His landlord had served him notice, he said. Couldn't find a place fast enough. Not in this market. Could he stay in the guest room just temporarily? Temporarily had stretched into 11 months. I had not been charged rent by either of them. I had paid, in that time, the full gas and electric on a house occupied by 6 people, the property taxes on a home valued at just under $1.4 million, all internet, cable, and streaming services, and a grocery bill that had roughly tripled. I had not thought of it as a problem. I was thinking of it as a problem now. I did not confront either of my sons that night, or that week. I went back to the house, made dinner, and ate with Remy's family and Sean at the kitchen table like it was any other evening. Remy talked about a renovation update that I had long since stopped believing would ever be finished. Sean scrolled his phone and made occasional noises of agreement at things no one was saying. Oliver ate exactly 4 bites of everything and May fell asleep against my arm. I looked at my sons across the table and tried to match what I was seeing with what Eloise had told me. She had never been wrong about people. That had sometimes frustrated me. She was the one who'd quietly suggested after about 6 months that my old business partner had a drinking problem that was going to become my problem. She was the one who'd told me our accountant was billing us for hours. She didn't believe he'd actually worked. She was the one, 32 years ago, who'd taken my face in her hands and said, "Your brother is not going to pay you back, Thaddeus. Let it go before it costs you more than money." Every time I'd resisted, every time she'd been right. So I sat with it. I kept sitting with it. In January, I called a lawyer my friend Hector had recommended. Someone Hector had used for his own estate issues after his wife passed. Someone with no connection to me or the boys or anyone I knew in common with them. Her name was Vivian Osei, and she had an office in Burlington. I drove out on a Wednesday morning and told her everything. The letter, the overheard conversations Eloise had described, the living arrangement, the finances as I understood them. When I finished, she said, "I want you to get a full accounting of your assets before we do anything else. Not just a summary, a complete picture. Can you do that?" Said I could, and I'd like you to stop discussing your financial situation with your sons. Not dramatically. Just don't bring it up. They bring it up, I said. Then change the subject. Or be vague. Can you do that? I thought of 32 years of being the one at the dinner table who answered every question directly and told the whole truth whether it was welcome or not. "I can try," I said. It took about 6 weeks to get the full picture together. My financial advisor, a woman named Genevieve, who I'd been with for 12 years and trusted completely, was professional and thorough and didn't ask unnecessary questions. I told her I was updating everything for estate purposes. That was true enough. The picture, once it was laid out in front of me, was one Eloise would have recognized. I was, by any reasonable measure, comfortable. The house, the cottage, the investment portfolio, the pension from 40 years in commercial insurance. It was more than I'd ever expected to accumulate, honestly. I had grown up without much. We both had. The accumulation of it over a lifetime had always felt slightly abstract, like a number on a page that referred to some other version of me. But it was real, and it was, I now understood, something that 2 people in my kitchen were actively planning around. I hired a firm to do a quiet title search on the cottage property, just to confirm everything was in order. It was. I also asked Genevieve to quietly review whether there had been any attempts to access my accounts or request information on my behalf in the past 2 years. There had been one. In October, about 9 months after Eloise passed, someone had called my investment firm posing as my personal assistant and asked about account balances and beneficiary designations. The call had been flagged and declined per protocol, but no one had thought to tell me about it at the time. The call had come from a number registered to Remy's business. I sat with that piece of information for a full week. I want to be careful here about something. It is possible. I have told myself this repeatedly, that Remy's call was innocent, that he was trying clumsily to prepare himself for an inheritance he assumed was coming eventually, that he wasn't planning anything specific. People do strange things when they are grieving or when they are frightened about money, I know that. But I also know what Eloise heard from the hospital bed. And I know what Remy said to me in February, on a Sunday afternoon when we'd been watching hockey in the basement. He'd waited until the second period, and then, very casually, he'd said, "Dad, I've been thinking. With the way things are right now, costs going up, the real estate market being what it is, have you given any more thought to formalizing things? For the cottage, especially?" I asked him what he meant by formalizing. Just getting everything structured properly, so there aren't complications later. "For who?" I said. He looked at me. "For all of us." I told him I'd think about it. He went back to watching the game. After that, I called Vivian. We spent March and April working through the legal restructuring. I want to be precise about what I did because I wasn't trying to punish anyone. That was not the point. Eloise had not asked me to punish. She'd asked me to protect myself. The house went into a trust, a living trust, structured so that it passed outside of my will. The cottage was transferred to a separate arrangement, with a named administrator who was not a member of my immediate family. My investment accounts were reorganized with updated beneficiary designations. Vivian walked me through all of it, slowly and patiently, on 4 separate afternoons. At her suggestion, I also updated my will. The new version was simpler and cleaner than the old one. Both boys were still in it. I want to be clear about that. I had not disinherited my sons. I am not that kind of father, and whatever they'd done or planned or failed to be honest with me about, they were still my children. I had changed my mind about nothing so fundamental as that. What I had changed was this. The new will included a provision that any distribution to either son was contingent on them not having resided in any property of mine rent-free for more than 60 days in the 3 years preceding my death. The clause had been Vivienne's idea. She said it was cleaner than an outright exclusion and less likely to be contested. I understood what it meant, practically speaking. The boys would need to move out before I died, or forfeit their share. "When are you going to tell them?" Vivienne asked on the last afternoon. "I'm going to give them a chance first," I said. I sat them both down on a Saturday in late April. Brenda took the grandchildren out. I'd called her separately and suggested she might want to take Oliver and May to the Science Center that afternoon, no particular reason. We were at the kitchen table, the three of us. There was coffee. There was a plate of cookies I'd bought from the bakery on Lakeshore because I hadn't been sure what else to do with my hands that morning. I told them I'd been doing a review of my finances and my estate plans. I told them I'd worked with a lawyer and an advisor over the past few months. I told them I was comfortable and that there was nothing to worry about on that front. Then I said, "I've also been thinking about the living arrangement. I love having you here, and the kids especially. But I think it's time we talk about a proper plan for your households." Remy said carefully, "What kind of plan?" "A timeline," I said. "For both of you. Moving to your own places, I want to set a date." There was a silence. Sean said, "Dad, I've been looking but the rental market right now." "I know what the rental market is," I said. "I've been watching it for 11 months. I paused. "I'm also happy to help. I can contribute to first on a place for either of you, as a loan. Not a gift, I want that to be clear, but a loan with a proper agreement drawn up." The word loan landed the way I expected it to. Remy said, "That seems," and then stopped. "Formal?" I offered. He said nothing. "I've been thinking about something your mother used to say," I told them. I was looking at the table when I said it. "She used to say that love and money are both important, but they don't mix well without clear agreements. She was better at that than I ever was." I looked up. "I'm trying to be better." Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Sean said quietly, "Did something happen, Dad?" And I said, "Your mother left me a letter." The room changed. I could feel it, the way you feel a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. "She'd been watching the last few years," I said. "She was worried about me. She asked me to take care of myself." I kept my voice level. "I'm doing that." I did not tell them the specific things Eloise had written. I did not mention the phone call to my investment firm. I did not say the word contingent or explain the clause in the new will. I didn't have to. They both understood, I think, more than I said. Remy moved out in June with Brenda and the children. He found a place in Mississauga, a detached house, actually, larger than I'd expected, which told me that the financial picture was not quite as dire as he'd implied. He didn't ask for the loan. I was not surprised. Sean took until August. He found a basement apartment first, then a proper one-bedroom in Hamilton by September. He called me the week he moved in, actually called, not a text, and we talked for about 40 minutes. It was the longest conversation we'd had in 2 years, and it was mostly about nothing. A hockey trade he thought was stupid, a documentary he'd watched, a memory of a camping trip we'd all done when he was 9. He didn't mention the letter, or money, or the house. Neither did I. I don't know what my sons thought about in those months, whether there was guilt, or resentment, or some complicated mixture of both that they'd sorted through privately and then set aside. I know Remy called less frequently. I know Sean called more. I know that Oliver and May still come to see me every other weekend, which was Brenda's doing, I think, and I am grateful for it in ways I don't know how to fully express. The house in the autumn was quiet in a way it hadn't been since before Eloise got sick. I had expected to find that quietness unbearable. Instead, I found it clarifying. I ate what I wanted for dinner. I listened to the radio in the mornings without anyone asking me to turn it down. I sat in Eloise's garden in September and just looked at what she'd planted. I thought about her often. I thought about the fact that she'd written that letter from a hospital bed, or before that, at the roll-top desk in her study, and had thought carefully enough about my particular kind of stubbornness to understand that I'd need 3 years before I was ready to hear it. I thought about how that was perhaps the most loving thing anyone had ever done for me. I had a neighbor, Yvette, who'd lost her husband a few years back, and who I'd gotten into the habit of having dinner with occasionally. Nothing romantic, just the practical comfort of eating with someone rather than alone. I told her about the letter once, over pasta in her dining room. Not all of it, just the shape of it. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Yvette said. She was, I said. She would have found your pasta far superior to mine. Well, obviously, Yvette said. I went home that evening and I sat in the living room with the lights low, and I thought that I was, at 68 years old, in reasonable health, with a roof over my head and money in the bank, and 2 grandchildren who drew me pictures and called me Papa, that I was, by any honest accounting, a lucky man. I had a letter in my desk drawer that told me what I already owed. I intended to keep living in a way that would have made her proud. That was the deal. That was what the letter was actually about, underneath the warning and the legal arrangements and the careful timing of 36 months. It wasn't really about Remy or Sean at all. It was Eloise telling me, "You still have time. Don't waste it being taken advantage of. Don't waste it being afraid. Just live. I'm trying."